economy has already gone to hell in a handcart in 2020. The last thing we want to do is start 2021 in the same way. But I'm afraid I think it is possibly going to be almost inevitable. And I'll explain why. It's nothing to do with the tier system. It is to do with Christmas. Because Sage said a few weeks ago, though I think they've slightly rowed back on this now, they said that for every day that you loosen the measures at Christmas, you have to have another 5 days of harsher measures. Now, I'm taking that to mean lockdown. So the 5 days that where everybody's going to meet up in their 3 household bubbles over Christmas, I think that could have a catastrophic effect in the new year on the rate of infections. And if we get to the point of, say, 10th, 15th of January, and Boris Johnson appears on a podium in Downing Street saying, well, sorry, guys, we're going to have to lock down again for another month, it will be like Groundhog Day, won't it? Do you think that's likely? Nobody wants it. This is also something where I think we've got to accept, surely, that there is no politician in the House of Commons, there is no politician in the government, there is no politician in any political party that actively wants to impose harsher measures and have another lockdown. Why would they? I mean, because they're making a rod for their own back, aren't they? Why would they actively want to do that? So they're doing it, presumably, because the advice is it's the only way to stop the infection. It's the only way to get the infection rate down a bit. So let's stop with any sort of supposition that politicians from whatever party are deliberately targeting an area of the country or a section of the population, because surely everyone wants to get back to normal in the economy and in our lives as early as possible. That's what everybody wants, isn't it? And isn't it a bit weird to question that? 0345 6060 973. Well, there were a series of warnings at tonight's Downing Street briefing. Chief Medical Officer Professor Chris Whitty says, I would not encourage someone to hug and kiss their elderly relatives over the Christmas period.
Would I want someone to see their family? Of course, that's what Christmas is about, whether people celebrate Christmas as a festival for themselves or from any other belief system. It's an opportunity for families. But would I encourage someone to hug and kiss their elderly relatives? No, I would not. It's not against the law, and that's the whole point. You can do it within the rules that are there, but it does not make sense because you could be carrying the virus, and if you've got an elderly relative, that would not be the thing you'd want to do in the period where we're running up to a point where actually we might be able to protect older people. So I think people just have to have sense, and I think this is very much what I think people will do. The fact that you can do something, this is true across so many other areas of life, doesn't mean you should.
And the Prime Minister had this warning.
If we ease off now, we risk losing control of this virus all over again, casting aside our hard-won gains and forcing us back into a New Year national lockdown with all the damage that would mean. The tough measures in our winter plan are the best way to avoid this outcome.
He urged against taking our foot off the throat of the beast.
What we've got to do is keep our eye on the prize and remember that, in just a few months, we will have a vaccine. I'm absolutely convinced of it now. And I'm convinced that, Chris has finally talked me into it, that by April, things genuinely will be much, much better. But what we want to avoid is relaxing now too much, taking our foot off the throat of the beast now when we've got it, pretty much where in a much, much better place than it was before the autumn measures came in.
Dr. Bharat Pankhania joins us, senior clinical lecturer in public health medicine at the University of Exeter and a former consultant on controlling the spread of diseases for Public Health England. Good to have you on again, Bharat. Now, take us through your opinion of what has been announced today, and is it likely to have the desired effect?
I feel very disappointed in listening to Prime Minister Johnson a few seconds ago, whereby he says, we've almost got our foot on the throat of the beast. If that is the case, which may be, why are you allowing us to get together on the 23rd to the 27th of Christmas? those 5 days of relaxation, because those 5 days of relaxation with lots of people moving across the country, crisscrossing the country, getting together, will cause a rise in number of cases. And then the rise in number of cases will generate further cases. So I feel a bit disappointed that none of our politicians in any of the nations had any vertebral column to stand up and say, 2020, let us invest and not have a get together like we've always had.
What do you put that down to? Do you think it is just a lack of political courage, or is there something else behind it?
I think it is a lack of political courage, because we elect our leaders to make unpopular decisions. Of course it is unpopular, and I'm with it. I don't want the nation to have an unpopular Christmas, but at the same time, I want to say, look at it as your investment. And 2021, as our chief medical officer has said, we will have immunizations with vaccines coming online. So it's a little bit more endurance for a better 2021. Why undo it over those 5 days of Christmas? Because it's not 5 days. We know human behaviors. It will probably be stretched to 5, 6, 7, 10 days, etc. Who is monitoring it? Who can monitor it? And then our case numbers, unfortunately, go up.
And how long do you think that time lag would be? Because I don't know if you heard my introduction to this. I said I think a third lockdown in the early part of 2021 is now inevitable, largely for the reasons that you've just articulated, actually. And I said, well, it's probably going to be maybe the middle of January before it becomes apparent that the number of cases is rising exponentially. And at that point, I fully expect the Prime Minister to stand up at the press conference and say, well, sorry, guys, we did our best. We did ask you to not take unnecessary risks at Christmas, but hey, this is where we are. You all wanted us to do it. We did it. So we're going to have to lock you down again. Is that the timetable that you think might be possible?
That's about right. It's about late January when we may, if things go wrong, see a surge in number of cases. I hope we don't. I don't want this surge in number of cases, and I hope I'm sitting here and I am wrong. But my fears are, as a infectious disease doctor, is all the ingredients are in place. If we were to mix carelessly over the Christmas period, then case numbers will go up.
Well, I suppose they've made their beds now and they've got to lie in there. There's no way they're going to reverse that. And it was a full government agreement across the whole of the United Kingdom. But I think, like you, I think they may come to live to regret that decision. But let's look at the bright side. The infection rate does seem to be declining, 25% down over the last week. The number of deaths is still going up, but there's always a time lag there. So do you put that down to the lockdown, or do you think it is partly due to the tiered system that was there before the lockdown?
It's a bit of both, because what we need is restrictions on human activity. And the greater the number of restrictions and the greater the level of restrictions, the fewer the newer cases are generated. And what we want is the case numbers to fall down. That's what we need to aim for. Unfortunately, we just don't seem to be able to do it right, which is, I said it in about March on BBC Radio 4 to Nick Robinson. I said we need a hard, fast, instant lockdown, and then we will be out of it sooner and better off. But we never implemented that. And if we look at how far the South Koreans and the others have raced ahead of us, is because they took preemptive action very early on.
Although I read in the paper today that I think South Korea has got its highest number of daily cases, although compared to us, it's a fraction. It's like 600 or something. So I'm not going to make too much of that. But of course, Boris Johnson would come back to you and say, well, I hear what you say. And you may have said that in, I don't know which part of March you said that in, but you may have said that in March. But the advice that we were getting from SAGE as late as the 17th of March was that we shouldn't be going into lockdown. So because they say if you go too early, people won't accept it. The longer it goes on, the less they will accept it. So they were advising to go a bit later. The politicians took that advice, maybe quite willingly took that advice. I'm not sure anybody was arguing against it. And well, we are where we are. And I'm sure all this will come out in the inquiry. But the government ministers can only really go on the advice that they have at a moment in time, can't they?
Indeed, but Ian, I'm not sure what part of the advice our leaders are taking, because there's a lot of noise around. Advice is given, ministers are taking the decisions, and the decisions they're taking are not necessarily pertaining to the advice given. And even our chief medical officer, I don't like to criticize our leaders or our chief medical officer. Our chief medical officer would really like to say, don't get together over Christmas. The best he could say was, don't hug granny. Both of us know that when you are in the same house, same room as our elderly parents, grandparents, and we sit down to have dinner together, and we have drinks and laughter and all those things together, transmission of infection can happen. You don't have to have a hug to have a transmission of infection.
No, you're absolutely right. I hope that what I said earlier that Nicola Sturgeon had said about just because you can doesn't mean to say that you should. And I think Chris Whitty said something vaguely similar in that briefing today. I hope we hear a lot more of that. But of course, most people, I think, what are we now, the 26th of November? I think a lot of people have actually already made their Christmas plans, and they're not going to change them now, even if the advice is to do so. But there we are.
This is what I would advise, if I can take a few seconds of your time, Ian, is look, gentlemen, ladies, fellow citizens, if you've made the decision to meet, all well and good, just do one thing. Before you meet, say 15, 20 days before you meet, keep a very low profile. Don't mingle with other people. Don't go out to parties. Don't do anything. Just keep a low profile. Then do a assessment nearer the time that you're going to be meeting up. Are you well? Do you possibly have an infection? A checklist, in other words, and then meet. That may also be a small measure forward.
In an ideal world, you would actually self-isolate for 2 weeks before Christmas. Now, not everybody will be able to do that, but I remember that call that we had. Was it last night or the night before, from Lisa in Tunbridge Wells, who said that she had given this a lot of thought. She was going to meet up with her mother and her brother for Christmas, who lives on his own, but she was going to take her 2 kids out of school a week early, and all her family were going to self-isolate for 2 weeks. Now, that will work for Lisa. It wouldn't work for everyone, but she had given it thought, and that's all we can ask people to do, isn't it, Fran? And that's really what you're saying.
Indeed, that's what I'm saying. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Good to talk to you again. That's Dr. Bharat Pankhania.
Thank you.
Right.
Thanks ever so much for that, Bharat. It was perfect. Really appreciate you coming on.
Conversation.
Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
0345 660 973.